Welcome back, PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Niccolls here. We've got a lovely day to play with the lovely brand new Leica D-Lux 8. But is this a compact, powerful camera, or is this a point and shoot, or somewhere in between? We're gonna find out. So right off the bat, holding the D-Lux 8 feels very familiar to me because I've played with this camera before in one form or another. I mean, this is basically the Panasonic LX100 version 2, which is essentially the Leica D-Lux 7, which now brings us to the Leica D-Lux 8. And although there are some thoughtful changes that I absolutely want to point out, I still can't help but feel like it's very familiar to what I was used to. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I always like the handling on this camera, from the beautiful knurled aperture controls to the selector switch to change my aspect ratio from 3:2, 16:9, 1:1 square, or 4:3, the standard ratio, and the autofocusing controls on the side. But you know what else we've seen before? This exact same lens and sensor assembly, and that's a little bit unfortunate because back in the day when the LX100 version 2 and the D-Lux 7 were current, that actually worked quite well, but now it's feeling a little long in the tooth. So we have the same power zooming 24-75 full frame equivalent lens, giving us an f1.7 to 2.8 maximum aperture, and that's mated to a 20 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, but we're not gonna get 20 megapixels. Because of the multi-aspect ratio on this camera, everything is a crop down into the sensor, and so at my maximum 4:3 aspect ratio, I'm gonna get 17 megapixels instead. So I know that a lot of people are gonna have a visceral reaction to the fact that we're cropping into an already somewhat small sensor. We had the same reaction when we first saw this camera, but I still like the trade-off because, first off, let's just consider, I mean, micro four thirds sensors, they're still pretty decent image quality in low light. I do like the image quality I get from them, and we're only suffering about a 2.2 times crop factor here when we're at 4/3 ratio shooting. That's actually still way better and way larger than we get out of a Type 1 camera, not to mention any of the smaller sensors that you find a lot of the now popular point and shoot cameras that people are rocking on the street. And it really does give you that ability to change aspect ratios without really losing much resolution at all. So it occurs to me that I have never in my entire life here in Calgary taken a picture of this yellow and, in my opinion, hairy looking elephant. So I'm gonna rectify that. I'm gonna do it. And this is actually framing up really nice for the 4/3 aspect ratio. Boom! All right, here we're gonna do an example of 16:9 just to show that beautiful width on this panorama style mural. All right, so now for this alleyway, I'm gonna go to the soothing and pleasing traditional 3:2 aspect ratio. I feel like I'm shooting an SLR. Damn, this camera could do Sunstars. I'm loving square. I'm shooting the square format a lot because I never really often have a camera that composes for square in camera, and it's very nice, and more cameras should do it. Okay, so the Calgary Stampede, the greatest outdoor show on earth, has just ended. We had record-breaking visitors for this show. Now it's over. That's great. We're very happy about that. Cleanup crews are out, and the city's going to smell like piss for, a week or two. In fact, I'm probably standing in one of the locations that was used for that very activity. But let's talk about some extra features here on this camera. So battery-wise, this is using the older Leica DC15 battery. So battery life's not gonna be amazing here. These are power-dependent cameras with things like the electronic power zoom, and we're gonna get under 300 shots here on a full charge. It is nice that we have the older battery for compatibility's sake, but I would have liked to have seen a larger battery to give us more capacity. At least we now do have a USB-C port, so we can charge in camera faster than we were able to on the older models. Okay, so a lot of stuff is the same, but there are some notable changes here to the handling of this camera, which I think are very thoughtful and borrowed from the more modern crop of Leica cameras. So first off, up here, this thumb dial used to be a fixed exposure compensation dial. Now it's a customizable thumb wheel, and on top of that, I love the fact that we have a custom button on top as well. I also have two custom buttons here, and I'm finding that with these three, I have the customizability I need to set things that I want to have quick access to. Now we're on the topic of quick access. Another nice change here, we've got the same modern Leica Leica system where when I hit the menu the first time, it brings up a quick touchscreen menu, and that lets me access a lot of the other things that I might want to change, whether it be exposure compensation, flash controls, film styles, I mean, whatever you want, it's there. Push it a second time and it takes us into Leica's very simple, very easy to use menu system. Now, as for switching back and forth between photo and video modes, again, I like that I can access that right through the quick menu with a touch, or I can customize a button to quickly switch back and forth between photo and video mode. This is nice because I don't have to have a dedicated switch or dial on the camera to go back and forth between those two. And it's also nice that it keeps all of your menu settings separate now between photo and video, and that really cleans up the interface. So what's nice here about these cameras with the smaller sensors, the smaller lens assemblies, and a dedicated autofocus macro mode is I can actually get really close to do fun close-ups. And autofocus here is working very well. I like the touchscreen interface, so I can quickly select it, and I can get nice, stunning close-ups, wide angle. Now on the Leica D-Lux 8, we now have an SD card slot, which is UHS 2 speed, but that doesn't help very much because this is still a fairly slow shooting camera, and here I'll explain why. So first off, this camera is quite limited in its burst rates. You can shoot up to 2 frames per second with autofocus in 12-bit RAW format. If you go to anything higher like 7 or the maximum of 11 frames per second, that seems pretty fast, but we lose all autofocus, it's locked only, and we drop down to 10-bit image quality, unfortunately. But at least we have a nice change when it comes to the actual RAW file format on the D-Lux 8, because the D-Lux 7 was such a literal clone of the LX100 Mark II that it even had the same Panasonic proprietary RAW image file format. But here now in the D-Lux 8, we have DNG, which is fantastic. It's universal. We set a lot of other Leica cameras, and I always like working with it. Hey, have you subscribed to our channel? This is a great time to do it if you've somehow forgotten or been remiss in that regard. And if you get us to 225,000 subscribers, we will go back and work at our old haunt, the camera store here in Calgary. We'll do a whole shift. We're gonna do retail again. And the only way to make that possible, click that subscribe button. So let's talk about the zoom mechanism here. Ooh, look at that extension at 75mm equivalent. So this camera is a power zoom, but I have to say it's pretty slow. So here, I'm gonna go from 24 to 75 and go. Not exactly what I would call fast, and that can be tricky when you're on the streets, you want to get a fast shot. I find that I'm like, waiting for this thing to zoom in, hurry, hurry, hurry. So I do also notice on the D-Lux 8 that when I turn the camera off and then on again, it defaults to 24mm as its starting zoom position, and it would actually save me a lot of time if there was a setting like we've seen on other power zoom cameras where it will remember the last zoom range that was used. Hopefully that's something we'll see in a future firmware update. All right, let's talk about displays now on the D-Lux 8 here because we got some big improvements. First, the back panel is 1.84 million dots, up from 1.24. That's a nice improvement. Clean, sharp, absolutely. When it comes to the EVF as well, we've got a big change here as well. Now, the old EVF was 2.76 million dots, but it was field sequential. What that means is you get this weird rainbow effect pattern, especially if you moved your eye around. It was very jarring, very distracting, and I'm glad we're done with it. We now have a 2.36 million dot EVF, which is definitely on par with what I expect to see here, but it's an OLED display, so it's much nicer to see, 60 frames per second. My only complaint on these displays is I wish I could make them brighter, not only the EVF, but the back panel as well. On sunny days like this, as much as I can adjust it, I still find it's a little bit dim, usable, but not ideal. Minor gripe here as well, but it would be nice if this back panel could tilt, especially for a street camera or for all the wide angle sort of macro shots that I'm doing where I'm pushing the camera in far away from me. But I get it, we don't have a lot of real estate, and this is also one of the downsides when you keep the design exactly the same as the older camera. So because we're using the same old sensor technology, we are getting the same old autofocusing technology as well, which means we're not getting any of the cool phase detect hybrid autofocus that we've seen on the latest Panasonic and Leica cameras. So this autofocus experience is very much like I remember it. Contrast detect only, which to be honest is very accurate and actually very quick when you're in single focusing mode. You know, that's what I'm doing today, just single point, lock on, recompose, old school. But when it comes to tracking autofocus, continuous autofocus, it's very poor. You get the flutters, it's not very accurate. This camera does have face and eye detect, and that works great in single focus mode, but again, for tracking moving subjects, this is not a strong platform. So if you do pony up for the Leica D-Lux 8, you will get the latest film styles, but there's not many. I mean, out of the box, you don't get that many. The new monochrome high contrast is kind of fun. I've been playing with it, but you do also get an update to the Wi-Fi speed, and you can use the new Leica Photos app. And this is actually one of the nicest apps we've used for smartphone interface. Easy to upload photos, do some edits. You can also download a lot of the latest film styles from the Leica Photos app right back into the camera, and then you have access to them when you're shooting.
All right, Jordan here to talk about the video capabilities on the D-Lux 8. And I know it's the same old sensor and old lens, but because we've got Leica's latest processor in this, I was hoping we'd see a bump to the video performance. We do have to crop when we're recording 4K at 24 and 30 frames per second, and there's no 4K 60 option. Hoping all of that will be rectified, but that's not the case here. It does give you a 30mm wide angle as your maximum width when you're recording 4K in those modes. I was also hoping this would give us access to something like Leica's L-Log profile for increased dynamic range. Again, no luck there. So this is an okay camera if you want to grab like the odd little video grab shots, but there's no way to input a microphone, no headphone jack, very limited flexibility for it. So if you're looking for a compact camera that's good for video recording, you better just queue up and get yourself an X100 II.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our little photo walk here with the Leica D-Lux 8 in downtown Calgary. Let's answer our original question. Is this a large sensored camera like the X100 or the GR series? Or is this a point and shoot camera? Well, it really does actually sit somewhere in between. And that was kind of what still makes this camera interesting. So it made it interesting back in the day, but it is an expensive camera, no doubt. Not only because it's a Leica, but just because there's so much demand for these cameras. I mean, think what you will about the price. Leica are always able to find their niche market, and these things are back ordered all to hell. I think it's also important to consider the market that's just surrounding these compact cameras. They're very much in vogue now, and we've been saying on our podcast a ton that what Leica needs to do, what all the companies need to do, is just re-release their old cameras that they used to make because they'll do well again, and that's pretty much exactly what Leica is doing here. If you look at something like a Panasonic LX100 Mark II on the used market, you're going to be only saving a couple $100s, and you're getting vastly older technology as far as the displays go. So I do think then this camera actually isn't that expensive considering what you're getting with it. I do also think that this camera gives us the compactness and the built-in zoom that we would expect out of compact point and shoot cameras, and yet is going to deliver definitely better image quality than that. But make no mistake, this is not going to compete optically with something like a GR3 or an X100 for just total image quality. I was also surprised to find, using this kind of camera again, how much fun it is to have that aspect ratio choice right there on the camera, and it is a ton of fun, which is kind of the whole point. That all being said, I also still can't help but feel like the manufacturers now have to make something like the classic Panasonic GM series camera. Imagine this camera with a micro four thirds sensor that doesn't have to crop and has a micro four thirds lens mount that I could then put compact zooms and primes on. That would blow me away, and I think it's time. So let's hope that there's a D-Lux 9 coming out soon. So thanks for joining us. Did you like Jordan's 8-bit Lakitu videographer shirt? If you do, you can get it at store.petapixel.com along with all of our other merch and all of our other shirts and hoodies. You should check it out. Also, the aforementioned podcast, we talk about so much stuff there. We'd love to see you there. It's on the exact same channel right now, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'd appreciate that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.